Welcome, everyone, to yet another episode of Disruption Talks, where we meet the globe's leading thinkers in terms of fintech and retail mostly, but not only. However, today our special guests are joining us from the fintech vertical to tell us how there is much room to be used up when we're thinking of typical payment providers such as Stripe, PayPal, many other solutions and facilitators. There is room for a lot to be done. And joining us today is Ben and Skyler from Dwolla. I made sure that I'm pronouncing it right just before we started, so you can't make a mistake there. So we have Ben, the VP of Product, and Skyler, the Senior VP of Tech. Welcome, gentlemen.
Hey, welcome, Philip. Thanks for having us.
Agreed. Thanks for having us today.
It's our pleasure. So I will do this and explain like I'm five formats stolen from Reddit, and then you can correct me where I'm wrong. Essentially, Dwolla powers account-to-account payment solutions, and if I'm getting this right, you are allowing for that to happen faster and without the typical approach to ACH, so automated clearinghouses for our audience. Now, feel free to correct me, tell me how wrong I am.
No, I think you're spot on with where you need to be. We at Dwolla, we like to say Dwolla powers sophisticated account-to-account payment solutions for innovators. So you hit the USP right on the head.
Okay, glad. Don't try to poach me just yet. So let's have the opportunity to dive into the future of those B2B fast payments and embedded finance. So, gents, let's play ball here. We have two guest speakers, so it's not going to be like a tennis match between me and the guests. We have to pass the ball around. So, short personal intros to begin with to get the audience familiarized with you. Ben.
Great. So again, thanks for having us. I've been at Dwolla nearly 7 years. Prior to being in product, I have a long career in information security at U.S. and international companies. And I have the privilege of leading product, which is a blast. We help discover and deliver business outcomes. And I really like finding out how things work at a deep level and solving really hard problems with teams that make me even better. So that's my short intro. Really happy to be here.
Solid. Skyler.
So my name is Skyler Nesheim, and I am the SVP of Tech here at Dwolla. I've actually been at Dwolla for almost 9 years now. I think in a couple days it'll actually be 9 years. I started off as a software engineer here and cut my teeth working on our systems and building up our product suite. And from there, I've just continued to step into new roles and take on additional leadership responsibilities here. So in my day-to-day responsibilities as SVP of Tech, I kind of think of 4 areas that I spend a lot of my time, and I just love spending my time in these areas. It's very exciting. It's a lot of fun, really engaging. So the first area is leadership. I spend a lot of my time there thinking about, how do we push the company forward? How do we take initiative on our plans? How do we make sure that the engineering team, the technology teams are taking ownership for what we're trying to build at Dwolla? The second area that I spend a lot of time is evangelism. So it's doing talks like this, talking about Dwolla's product suite, our features, talking about it in the market, knowing our internal roadmap is something to talk about, but also having things that I talk about externally in that vein. Another area that I spend a lot of time is architecture, thinking about our systems, their performance, where they stand today and how they operate, but also where they need to be in the future. What types of new technology do we need to think about including in our platform? What existing technologies might be legacy or technical debt that we need to improve? So I spend a lot of time with my teams there. And then the last place that I spend a ton of time, and probably the most important area of my job, is people. We've got a really great team at Dwolla, and a lot of my responsibility and exciting part of my role is working with that team and making sure that we're cultivating the right culture and supporting the awesome people that we've brought on to help Dwolla grow.
Which is exactly what I wanted to ask you. So, Ben, you're up next. And Skylar, so happy that this talk helps you fulfill one of those areas of the evangelism that you mentioned. So, looking forward to many more. But, Ben, what about you when asked the same questions? What's your day to day?
Day in the life, yeah. No day is the same, which is a common response. But let me go a layer deeper here. I would put it into 3 different buckets. Bucket number 1 is strategy, roadmap delivery, planning, future discovery, problem solving, and making trade-offs. The second is tactics, helping teams with decisions, removing roadblocks, driving execution and performance against our goals, attending meetings, all the things we do to have the tactics to drive things forward. And then the last is team building and development. I've spent considerable time hiring and developing our team, and we're a remote first company, so we can have talent from anywhere in the US, and we are a US company now, but there's more to talk about on international. But building that team to scale with the business is something I think about every day. How do the one-on-ones drive towards that? How do we have development plans, training, learning the business? And we do power sophisticated account-to-account payment solutions. And that sophistication means there's a lot to know and learn to be payments experts. That's something I think about a lot. So that's the day in the life from my seat.
Okay. And how often do you guys bump into each other during your day to day, or week to week, or month to month, quarter to quarter, whatever is the answer? I want to know, how do your jobs intertwine, if at all? I'm pretty sure they do, but gotta ask.
When I think about, who I work with on the executive team at Dwolla, Ben is one of the people that I spend probably the most time with. Product and engineering kind of go hand in hand. We've got a saying here where Ben and I say that there has to be no light between us. So when we're trying to move an initiative forward and when we're trying to provide leadership in an area, we've got to be really, really aligned. If what we found over time is that if we're really aligned and we know where we want to head, we do a much better job of guiding our teams in that area. So if I had to guess, I'd say I'd probably spend 6 to 8 hours a week in meetings with Ben Schmitt, maybe more.
Yeah, Philip, I would echo what Skyler said, but a couple of things to maybe go one layer deeper. One is Skyler interviewed me, so that pattern of working together has been present for 7 years. And since we're virtual, he and I collaborate in unique ways. Sometimes it is face-to-face like this, but a lot of times it can be asynchronous. We use Slack extensively, and having that steady beat of communication between the two of us so I don't blindside him or surprise him, and vice versa, is really important.
Oh, I'm going to assume both of you are happy with the way it is. I'm judging by the smiles, miles of smiles that I've seen when answering that question. Okay, so tell me, what's the latest with Dwolla, or maybe even better yet, because you said that I nailed the USP on the head, but if we were to explain it to a non-tech person, if you're trying to sell it to someone to whom this will bring value, but they don't necessarily speak the technical lingo, who's that person, first of all, typically? Who's the person who chooses Dwolla is the thing that resolves my issues? And what are those issues that Dwolla addresses? Feel free to jump in, Ben.
Yeah, why don't I start, Skyler? But let's start with repeating it, and then I'll pick out one part that I really want to talk about, and then Skyler, let's tackle the rest. So we power sophisticated account-to-account payment solutions for innovators. So I want to talk about innovators. Innovators is someone who's trying to do something different or make an improvement. And this can be from a fintech innovator, maybe a small company or someone with an idea to make something better. And we can work with them to do really incredible things. It could be faster payments, faster time to market, holding a balance, a number of properties. But innovators doesn't mean small companies. It means all the way up to the largest enterprises who have a division or wing thinking about how can we make improvements? How can we do something better? Also known as digital transformation. That's another area we play really well in. So when it comes to innovators, we can meet the needs of sophisticated account-to-account payment solutions from those with brand new ideas who are doing something truly innovative to a large company that's innovating and doing digital transformation. That's the one part I wanted to point out that's really interesting to me. But Skyler, there's other parts of the USP that are fascinating. So I'll hand that one to you.
Yeah, Philip, I'd be interested, based on your subscription base, do you think folks who are listening to this are familiar with the concept of open banking?
I was about to say that, judging by the amount of content that we have produced revolving around fintech, open banking being one of them, they better be. So feel free to assume that if they're listening, their ears are peeled for such content.
Yeah, I suspected so much, especially in their market and based on what you all share. So open banking, I think, has really taken hold very, very strongly in the European market. But it hasn't, you've probably talked about this many times, but it hasn't taken so much hold in the US market. And Dwolla really we believe that we play an important part in open banking. And we think about open banking as kind of like three edges on a triangle, where the first edge is the banks themselves, right? They bring so much to the open banking picture. And the second edge, in the US market at least, is data providers. So folks who give access to the underlying information that's stored in the banks. Maybe it's about the transaction history or about the way to connect to the banks, things of that nature. And then the third edge of the triangle is account to account payments. So how do we move funds between bank accounts in this open banking world? And that's the space that Dwolla really plays in. So you asked, like, how do you explain this to someone who doesn't know this space or doesn't know about this technology? I was talking to my team the other day and said, hey, this is a great time to practice these things because you're about to come in the US holiday season. We have Thanksgiving and other holidays coming up. And during that time, it's very common for a family to ask you, so what exactly do you do? What does your company do? And try to give more information. We've all been part of that story. So it's a really good time for our team to be thinking about and practicing what Dwolla does and how we explain it to others.
Okay. Ben, I saw your lips moving, but you're muted as well. Was that just a nod of approval, or did you want to?
Nod of approval. I think touching on open banking, the three parts to that triangle and where our role is helping with connections, Skyler nailed it.
Okay. So we know what Dwolla is. What's the latest with Dwolla? The year is wrapping up to an end. 2022 just around the corner. Just this summer, if my tech crunch isn't off, you were funded. So pretty sure there's a solid and broad answer to how this year is finishing and how the next one is going to start.
Excellent. So Skyler and I will do handoffs here. I'll cover part of that, but on the funding, I think Skyler's got some interesting points, as do I. But how are we doing? We're doing really well. We're scaling. When I say scaling, we're hiring. And since we're a remote first company, we can hire from anywhere in the US. So that's one part of scaling. But the other is we're scaling the platform. We're seeing growth. So I'll cover some areas here that might give some contours there. COVID-19 had an effect on many companies. And since really the beginning of COVID-19, we've seen roughly an 80% increase in transaction volume. So the platform is scaling and our customers are putting more volume through us. That's great. We've seen payment volume growth. Really, it's going to be 3x this year. That's really the target we're looking for. And 2022 is going to be bigger. So we're seeing not just transaction volume, but overall growth happening. We've released and launched some initiatives over the last year or so. Real-time payments in the US. So as Skyler mentioned, that's something that Europe has had for a while. We now have had it to market for some time. We can push to debit cards. So that's another payment solution that works 24/7. And we do have a low-code set of offerings that we've built and brought to market. So getting our customers not just faster payment types, but the ability to get live faster is really important to us. And the API is really well documented. We have a dashboard, but these components, these drop-in components, help our customers get value even sooner. They can present them, embed them, and have a quicker access to the value of the platform. And then the last is end users. When a client works with Dwolla, a customer that has a problem they're solving, they will then bring on end users. We've seen about 3 million end users through the first half of 2021 being added to the platform. Again, another scalability issue that we're tackling and doing really well with as our customers grow and do digital payment solutions. As for the funding, very exciting stuff. I'll kind of hand that one to Skyler about what we're doing based on that initiative.
Yeah, so we were really excited to raise a round this year. Again, a lot based on the growth that Ben just highlighted. We've really seen that COVID-19 has caused a lot of businesses that weren't already thinking about digitally transforming to actually have to digitally transform. And that has brought a lot of new interest in Dwolla and our ability to support account to account payments. And so we're looking to utilize the proceeds from that round of funding toward continuing to catalyze growth. There's a few areas that we're really interested in. We want to continue to expand in the space around faster payments. So we talked about RTP, which is the clearinghouse's technology for supporting faster payments. But we're also really excited about FedNow that's coming soon, as well as the counterpart to RTP, which is request for payments. That's another area that we're really excited about expanding into. Another area of expansion will be into partnerships. So Dwolla already has a pretty robust partnership ecosystem. We're going to continue to build out tooling and APIs to support partners in similar businesses to Dwolla that we can work together on. And then the last piece is international payments. So we're really excited to expand what we're doing in the US to at least initially offer disbursements internationally and then work toward other types of payment offerings account to account soon.
So that sounds like a healthy mix between vertical scaling, but also horizontal expansion into new products. So not only supercharging those that already have been there, but opening up some brand new doors. So those broad descriptions did answer my follow-up questions. So I want to ask you this, because Dwolla's unique selling point is flexibility and customization, as opposed to the perhaps market leading by market share solutions, but not market leading in terms of the customization and flexibility that you offer. So using the age-old trope of give them a finger, they will bite off the entire arm, I'm wondering, how do you manage the desire for your customers, current or soon to be, to not be on a arm-based diet only? I'm asking, how do you curb, how do you stop, how do you manage the desire for flexibility in terms of providing it, but also making sure that you don't overoffer the ability to customize into becoming essentially a software house that develops custom-made solutions for each and every potential or current customer?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And that's something that Ben and I deal with all the time. He talked earlier about how do we prioritize the right things. So prioritization is a key in our sort of collaboration between each other. When we think about what Dwolla does, we think about account to account payments, maybe in a couple different categories. One category might be what we would consider simple account to account payments. And the idea here is that we're probably in the simple space using maybe a single payment method. Perhaps we're using just ACH, or perhaps we're using just RTP, something like that. Also in the simple space, we're probably having pretty simple, what we call flow of funds, right? So maybe just receiving payments, or maybe just paying vendors. So very simple use cases. That's an area that Dwolla supports, but it's not actually our area of expertise. Our area of expertise is probably more along the lines of sophisticated account to account payments. And in this space, what we're seeing innovators do is combine multiple payment methods. So they might be using some ACH, some RTP, some push to card or push to debit types of transactions. And they're combining that with lots of different sophisticated funds flows. So they may be collecting funds and then dispersing them. They perhaps could be facilitating the flow of funds between two parties, maybe businesses that they work with. Sophisticated flows that require a little bit more customization to what you were just sharing with. Where we've focused is there's several different kinds of industry verticals that we work with. For example, we're seeing lots of adoption in the spaces around like gig economies, marketplaces, insurance verticals, as well as investment verticals. So those various spaces that we work in, what we're finding is there's a set of sophisticated solutions that can be utilized several times over, and those patterns can be repeated and adopted in different places. And we focus on kind of those core principles to build into our platform that we can build additional verticals on top of.
Ben?
Yeah, Philip, another thought that came to mind as you were asking about how far can you go providing additional software versus having a platform that is configurable and flexible. And so two things come to mind. One is we have this robust API that we've built over the last 10, 12 years that continues to evolve. And so our dashboard, the solutions, the components I mentioned, low code, they're all built to work off our API. So the API is that foundation, provides that configurability. So our customers can really use that and our robust documentation to make solutions. So that's one, right? That API is that foundation that provides a lot of flexibility. Then the other is the trade-off Skyler mentioned. We have a UX team. We do active discovery. We talk to our customers, and there's no shortage of innovation from our customers. But we have to also then prioritize based on that vision that Skyler shared earlier of how do we have sophisticated account-to-account payment solutions. And we make trade-offs and then have to communicate those transparently. That's one of the hardest parts about my job, is making those trade-offs. And sometimes we'll have to tell a customer what the trade-off is and work with them to find other ways to solve their problems. But I'll go back to our documentation API is that foundation that gives a customer really good flexibility to solve just about any problem.
Solid answer. So coming back to scalability, I want to ask a broad question, but then I see that we have some more questions from the audience concerning specifically that. So don't kill me for this, but Dwolla has been somewhat under the radar over the past years. But at the same time, fast growth. So in terms of the numbers, 2019, 11 billion processed in gross payment volume. In 2020, that jumped from 11 to 20 billion. And this year it's projected to be 30 billion, unless you want to tell me that it's even larger. You have some fresh off the stove projections. So just the sheer volume of transactions and by proxy of that users, biggest challenges in scaling the infrastructure at Dwolla. What are they?
So I mentioned one of my roles here at Dwolla is architecture, and this plays right into that space. When we think about scaling the company, there's a few different areas that we've focused in. One is that we've tried to really be data focused and be more predictive on, as you mentioned, some of the payment volumes and our projections. What's going to come and when's it going to arrive? How many clients are we going to need to onboard? How many payments are we going to do? What's our payment volume? And when we can get more predictive like that, we're able to predict and plan what things we need to have ready in our systems. So we can do load testing, performance testing, things of that nature to make sure that we've got the right things in place for the underlying technology as it goes. And Ben, I think maybe you might have some things to share about how we think about being prepared for what clients might bring from that perspective.
Yeah, the one that comes to mind as we talk about this is how we delight our customers in helping them solve their own problems. If a customer can solve their own problem, they can do it pretty fast. They have the relationship with their end users. How do we help them with that? And that falls into a discovery bucket of what can we do to help our customers solve their problems. Some of those could be technical. I mentioned low code. Some could be, do we give them additional data or insights in the dashboard? Do we have additional functionality in the API? But to scale the company, we have to help our customers solve their own problems. And there's a lot of deep thinking that continues in that area. That's one I would call out as a challenge that we have to continue to meet and increase our capabilities.
Another thing I'd share is, one of the things that we like to say, I think it's one of kind of our core principles, is that the concept of ruthless automation. So we want to make sure that everything that we're doing is prepared to scale. And the only way to really do that is to ruthlessly automate the day-to-day tasks and the things that are going on. Get in front of some of those more mundane things that you can see as different areas creak and groan as the business starts to build on top of a foundation that you have. What do you have to build automation on top of? So that's another area that we've focused a lot to help our growth.
Okay, but call me petty. What I heard here is how well you are making sure that the rails are supporting the fastest trains, no matter how many carriages they are. But we have an interesting audience question, and I'd like to flip the script here over. Talking about scalability, what criteria do you use to validate product ideas? So how do you establish that this train should actually be on the tracks and going that direction, not just in terms of how fast it's going?
That's a great one. Let me give two thoughts on that. First one is planning for the unknown. And one of the things Skyler and I've worked on probably the past couple of years to really codify is how do we align our resources on the most important things and reserving firepower. And this is hard to do, but when you develop a roadmap, you need to preserve firepower for some of the unknown. So Skyler and I have an 80-20 rule. The 80-20 rule is we're going to hold as much as we can, 20% of our resources back to deal with the unknown. to attack scaling problems before they become issues, et cetera. But that's for the unknown. What about the known? In this particularly this question, talking about scalability, how do we validate product ideas? We do a couple of things, and we're always learning. We first approach with an agile mindset. What is the problem we're trying to solve? We always prefer problems over solutions. And so we will actually interview and talk to clients to get that insight. And there's two ways. One is we have a UX team, and the UX team is really focused on discovery and driving to that problem. An example is, does this problem solve one of the 10 problems we know a customer wants when they're authenticating to the dashboard? What are the top 10, what are the personas, right? So there's that UX side, the research. The other is talking to our customers to understand their problem. And we have insights with our customers all the time from our customer support teams. That gives us insights. So that's how we get those ideas. Then how do we prioritize them? And that's the hard part. We have a number of different things we'll look at. Some is alignment with the vision that Skyler mentioned. Some of it is, when is it needed? Is this a future thing or is this needed now? So our PMs will look at it as a short, medium, or long-term bet. Sometimes we'll look at revenue potential. Revenue is a key thing, and not just new revenue, but protecting revenue or expanding it. And then the last is we may run it through an actual sophisticated tool. We have an internal tool that looks at value and cost and will give us a relative ranking. We'll take all of those and align them with a theme. Our roadmap is theme driven. And then aligned with the theme, we'll look at what are the best bets we want to place. And then we'll internally confirm those, be transparent about it. And then that gets published into a roadmap. So I gave you kind of the unknown path, and that's reservation of firepower, because ideas pop up all the time. And then the known path, which is all the things I mentioned, from UX to discovery to talking to customers to alignment to vision to the outcomes, not outputs you want to drive, and then confirming that and shopping it internally before we take that work on.
And before we shoot it over to our second guest speaker, I'm curious. You mentioned revenue protection, so churn prevention. Is that a big issue for Dwolla, or is it more that once someone is embedded, they just don't get out of that bed, so to say?
We want to delight our customers forever. But I think any company is going to focus on that. And so one of the lenses with prioritization is, what is the impact to revenue? And there's kind of three ways to look at it. Is it new revenue? Is it expanded revenue, or is it going to protect revenue? And almost anything we do should be aligned with one of those buckets. And it gives me a sense for this quarter or this next initiative. How are we placing the short, medium, and long-term bets? So it's nothing unique to Dwolla. It's something that I think any fintech should be focused on. And as that balance of new revenue, expanded revenue, revenue protection changes, you should know the factors of why it changes, how it aligns with your themes. So it's another lens we look at versus something specific I would call out.
I love the structured manner of your answer. And Skyler, on this very same question.
When I think about product ideas, to all the things that Ben said, first of all, right, we're aligned. No daylight between us, like we talked about earlier. But at kind of like a more meta layer, right? When I think about product ideas, it's really, it's about decision making. If you think about decision making, like you have big decisions you're trying to make of where the product should go and what should we do next. And the best way to make big decisions is to not make big decisions, is to think about how we might break those decisions down into smaller parts and how we can learn. So Ben touched on being agile and having an agile mindset. It's very, very important to what we're doing at Dwolla. And so what we want to do is take our big ideas and think about how we can take small steps, learn quickly, and also, when necessary, well, all the time, be failing, but fail fast. So we want to take a big idea. We want to take a big product initiative and a product idea. And while we can do business cases and make guesses about them, the best way to really validate those ideas is to get it to our clients as quickly as possible and find out if they value it. Get information about that and fail quickly if we're going to fail, or find success and move forward. So that's been really key in how we've been scaling Dwolla and how we've been validating those product ideas.
Okay. Building on this no daylight principle, there are some comments from the audience, such as 7 years of collaboration. Wow, it's probably speechless level of communication. But we have a question towards that. Sean asks, do your joint efforts mean innovation can be done more efficiently than you would think of it in other companies?
It's almost like sometimes we have, is a hive mind the right word? I don't know. I didn't think about it well enough. But I trust the decisions that Ben makes because we've worked together so much. We've collaborated so well. When he says we need to go a certain direction, there's an established level of trust there. And, I think trust is a key foundation to so many executive leadership positions and relationships. But that foundation of trust then allows us to move quicker because when Ben says, hey, I've been evaluating this market, this is the area we need to go, I know we've got trust that he spent the time to do that, but also that he's willing for me to challenge him and ask questions. But ultimately, we will commit and agree, find that no daylight between us concept, and move forward with our decisions. So yeah, I do think that our joint efforts, the relationships that we've built, the strength of our senior leadership team at Dwolla, that does allow us to move more efficiently and effectively than other companies.
Philip, I think Skyler nailed it. It isn't always roses, though. What I mean by that is sometimes Skyler and I will challenge each other and we will disagree. And Skyler said something important. We will disagree but commit. Meaning I may not agree with something on how we are aligning a resource or why we need to do a technical spike. Like, I'll just trust we have to do that. But if I do disagree, we will disagree and commit because it's the best thing for the business. So just know, as much as he and I are in sync, and I've been doing it for a long time, that level of trust does allow us to have disagreements, but then it allows our teams to move faster, because if they need a decision, if they need support, or if they wonder if Skyler and I are aligned, they don't have to. So our team has the latitude to move quickly because they know Skyler and I are going to have their backs.
Maybe, Ben, we could talk about a real example. I think it was last year about this time. We had a really incredible stroke of luck and opportunity at Dwolla. And part of being efficient means that when you have a stroke of luck and you have an opportunity, you want to be positioned to take advantage of that stroke of luck and that opportunity. And we had a really large client reach out to us and say, hey, we'd love to develop a new product with Dwolla around what the clearinghouse is developing for RTP. We just shared earlier in this podcast that we launched RTP. Ben, was it April last year?
April this year. We've
April
had it live prior to that at the very end of last year, right around Christmas.
Yeah. But that opportunity came as outreach from a customer about an idea of something that they wanted to build, but they had a really short timeline. We had to react really, really quickly to decide if we wanted to do it. So that required Ben and I to get aligned. Are we going to do it first? Then if we decide to do it, how will we do it? From both how will it fit into our product, what will it look like, how will it shape the vision for the future, and then also how will we reorganize our teams to jump and seize this opportunity quickly. And we had to really quickly put all those pieces together. I think it was over the course of maybe a week or two, right, to decide if we're going to take on a 2 or 3 month initiative to build out a new product. We had to decide really quickly how it fit in, get aligned, get the team excited and aligned on it, and then execute, actually build it and deliver it. So that's an example of a time where, this ability to work together efficiently really allowed us to move fast.
You just told me it's not all roses, but all I'm hearing are success stories. Excellent question from the audience. We're asking for the hardest nut to crack, or perhaps an uncrackable one. The biggest challenge, maybe not technical, maybe not necessarily technical. You have experience whilst developing a fintech product. Has there ever been such a thing where the no daylight principle and everything else that we've heard about, both you gentlemen and Dwolla as an organization, seem just not enough to overcome a challenge at all, or something that you were battling just like a Rubik's Cube that you try to solve and solve and solve, and eventually you did? But is there such a story?
It's a really complex question.
All roses then. All roses.
Yeah,
then. Okay.
no, it's definitely not all roses. And we talked about wanting to have this agile philosophy of being able to iterate and being able to fail fast. And for me, my mind goes to situations where maybe you've lost touch of that. You've lost touch of what it meant to take small steps. You've lost touch of what it meant to iterate. You've lost touch of what it meant to fail fast. And you find yourself in a situation where you're working on a product or a feature and you're maybe having trouble with adoption, or perhaps you're having trouble getting a third party on board with how you'd like that feature to be built. And there becomes a point where you have to realize that you haven't moved fast enough, or maybe you have failed. You didn't fail fast enough, but you still have to admit that you have a failure and you need to move on. And those are always really, really tough decisions, right? When do we divest from something that we've been doing? Ben, I'd be curious what other thoughts you have for this one.
My extension to your answer is sometimes, Philip, we have initiatives that are really long. Skyler mentioned agile and breaking things down. Where we've encountered challenges when you have an initiative that lasts, let's just say, a year, and those do happen. It could be integrating a bank as an example. Anyone who's listening who's worked with integrating a bank knows that's got to be done with high quality. It's got to be scalable, and it takes a long time because it's got to be done right. And each bank has specific needs that we have to meet. So I would say that is an area where Skyler and I've had to take a pause and say, how can we do this different? How can we break this problem down? Because it starts to feel, I'll be honest, waterfall. And we don't like that. We want to make sure we can deliver value every sprint. So I'd say that is a sticky one. Really long initiatives, and we continue to have retros and look at ways to improve. Those are the ones I would throw out, long ones.
And smoothly transitioning into some general engineering/product questions, or rather me being the voice of everybody who comes from a engineering/product background in the audience. What's your take or your advice on building high-performing engineering and or product teams? Of course, you mentioned remote work as being a key driver. We are fully aware of that. We have had the pleasure of interviewing a Deal COO twice. Just last week, Dan joined us again to tell us about how Deal facilitates that for each and every company. But I'm curious, outside of that remote work principle, the advice that you would share with anybody who's, let's say, just freshly funded, Series A, money's supposed to go to scaling, and they're waking up in the situation of, oops, I have to be an engineering manager. How do I make this efficient?
I can probably start here, and of course I know Ben will have more ideas to share. So the framework that I like to use goes back to that first 4 responsibilities of my job that I talked about, and thinking about what I'm doing to establish those things within the team. So leadership, evangelism, architecture, and people. I find myself waking up every day and thinking about those 4 things and how I make it part of how we're scaling at Dwolla. If I was in this hypothetical situation that you described, right? I'm a founder, or I'm starting a business, and now I realize I am in an engineering management type of role or something like that. What are the things that I would start working toward and developing? Well, one thing that I'd start working on is developing a set of common goals for my team. What are the things that we are working on together to solve problems? It's really, really easy to feel like you're moving fast and that you're getting a lot done if you have an 8-person team and all 8 people on the team are working on something individually. That can feel like you're making a lot of progress. But ultimately, what that looks like a lot of times is 8 things that stretch out for a really, really long time. Perhaps you'd be better organized if you had a fewer number of goals and a fewer focused things that you're working on, and try to make progress on those things individually, right? So instead of 8 people focused on 8 different things, maybe it's 2 things focused 4 people on each one. It's counterintuitive, but a lot of times you can make more progress by doing things that way. So first thing would be a common set of goals. Second thing would be thinking about the culture that we want to build within the team. One of the things that can really slow teams down is having difficulty in making decisions. So again, that model of 8 people working on 8 things, where each of them, 8, is trying to make their own decisions on how their work has to go. It could go a lot faster if we're working on 2 things, 4 people each, where a lot of the decisions are pre-made for us. That's another area I would focus. And core principles can also play into then, how do we think about engineering? What do we value in engineering? which can ultimately then lead to something that's very important in the people realm of the engineering leader responsibilities, which is, what's our culture? What do we value in how we interact together? What do we value in how we interact with product? What do we value as part of our role and our mission within the company? Those things are all things that I think engineering leaders should be thinking about.
And Ben, before you take over with a similar answer for product and telling me that +1 to what Skyler said, I want to make it slightly more difficult for you. There's an audience question, which I'd like you to incorporate the answer to in your answer. Because Skyler, you just mentioned the metrics that are being known, but the question actually asks for those top 3 most important product metrics and how are those broken down to the team level. So just to remind you, the original question was concerning building high performing first engineering now product teams, but with this added spice of those top 3 metrics and how they are communicated further down.
I'm ready. I took some notes. I anticipated your move here. All right, so let's start with the teams. Yeah, as he said, +1 to Skyler said. Let me go into a couple different areas because I've been in product for less time than I have been in my other roles in the past. So I've learned a lot over the past 2 or 3 years doing this. One is every discussion should start with the customer, whether it's a diagram, whether it's a problem, start with the customer versus start talking about the technical bytes and bits. Second is frameworks are critical. They will save you time. They will align the decision making. If you're going to use Scrum as an example, then you should read the guide and understand it deeply. And if you're not going to use it or modify it or change it, that's okay. But how does it align with what you're doing? You've got to stay educated. Being a payments expert takes constant education. Podcasts, waking up and understanding what problems are being solved by competitors. You got to have that fire in your belly. As you scale, you're going to go from being a generalist to a specialist. And that mindset means things like tribal knowledge. Other things need to be documented. You're going to go into specialization. And that's the last thing. Write stuff down. Having a culture of writing things down and sharing those will help you scale. So that's my answer to the first part. The second part, what are the metrics, most important metrics? I'm going to call out 3 that I think are pretty important here. One is NPS, and doing Net Promoter Score in a way that gets really good feedback is important. So NPS is one that we watch. We're constantly adapting and modifying, but that is one. Second one is the product lines themselves have performance, whether it's new customers, whether it's volume, whether it's customers going live, time to go live. Each product line will have unique and nuanced KPIs. So RTP is really important to us. It's our fastest, and we watch that really closely because we're continuing to innovate on that. We have to understand it deeply. The last one is onboarding. Almost all roads will lead to onboarding. I want to make sure that onboarding experience, that customer journey is not only documented, writing it down, but managed and measured really well to constantly give value as soon as we can, delight the customer and get them sticky, get them using our product so they solve their problem quickly. Those are the 3 that I would throw out there. And I think that's not unique to Dwolla. That's something that every company should be thinking about.
Net Promoter Score right there with you. Are you willing to share yours and perhaps bounce it off the industry average?
I would say we are above average currently. We don't publish it, but we watch it internally. We're actually modifying and extending how this is done. We use a combination of tools, right? You've got your app queues, we use Salesforce. It's a combination of we're using Wootrick, but we're going to continue to modify that. So we're above average in fintech, but we are definitely not satisfied, and there's more to come.
Correct answer. I mean, over here at NetGuru, our line of business allows for more or less automated touch points in terms of give us a score from 0 to 10, but rather each quarter there's a Net Promoter Score call with our customers where we collect that. I was actually granted the privilege of leading that initiative internally, so I am fully aware and also happy to exchange notes after the call if you're looking to extend it, because we have been playing around with that toy a lot over the past years, with the same principle in mind that however high it is, still should be higher. Yes, Skyler?
Sorry to interrupt you. I was going to say, before we go forward, I have one more thought about scalability that I thought might be valuable for the audience. And because we kind of talked about how does an engineering org scale and how does a product org scale, but those often like roll up to some sort of like R&D organization within your company. So how do you grow together, right? Or something along those lines. And I'm thinking about like one very simple question that we find ourselves asking over and over and over again, which really just helps pull us all into alignment really, really quickly. And that simple question is, what problem are we trying to solve? And if I had to guess, the question that's asked the most at Dwolla between our product and an engineering counterparts that can align us the quickest as possible, it's getting back to what is the problem that we're trying to solve? If we're working on a new product, why would a customer come to us? What problem are they trying to solve in this issue? If we've got a bug that we've got to fix, what problem or the root are we trying to solve? If we're talking about scaling, what problem are we trying to solve? We ask ourselves that over and over and over again. If we can get that problem definition really, really clean and crisp, what we can find from there is it's really easy for us to develop a set of options to solve that problem if we've got a clean problem statement. And then usually there's a set of a solution from that set of options that emerges as our recommendation for how we'd solve it. And that's just been, I think, a valuable insight for us and a trick or a hack that we've used in our teams to really, really pull us into alignment quickly.
Okay, so that sounded pretty cut out for Dwolla, the product metrics. What about teams and evaluating the performance of them? Are there any specific metrics that you stick to, or are those case product feature based and every time they're just completely different?
Well, Skyler and I look at, and I'll start with delivery, right? We will look at, with our lead of delivery management, how are we performing? And I mentioned 80-20, like Skyler and I look at that. How much of the team's time is allocated to things that are unplanned, and how do we have, firepower? And we'll look at that across each of the teams and work with the leads to give them feedback. So that's one, but ultimately each team has their own backlog, and their backlog and their team vision is something that we also check with them on for the alignment that Skyler said earlier. So I'd say really it's their backlog, their allocation, the metrics that they are tracking. First pass yield is a metric that one of the product line is tracking with respect to a process they support. So it is kind of bespoke per team, but we'll go back to that framework that I mentioned earlier, looking at Scrum, the ceremonies, and then going into how are the teams performing. Are they adding more tickets and stories than they're resolving? That's an indicator we'll look at. And then that allocation. Those are the ones I would talk about at a team level.
Skyler.
From an engineering perspective, team metrics that we're just starting to dabble in and explore include our cycle time. So how long does it take us from the point that we commit a code change all the way to the time that that code change is in production? We also have been dabbling and exploring tracking the number of deployments that we're doing on a daily basis by teams. We've dabbled in exploring the change failure rate for our teams. So of the changes that we deploy, what's the average, result in failure and success? We obviously want to err on the side of success, but we want to know if we're moving quickly, are we moving too quickly? Are we moving recklessly? Those are some of the areas that we've been exploring on the engineering side.
By the way, not sure about you, but I am offended. NPS is a great metric, but it's a lagging one. Pedro, please explain yourself in the comments, because I am offended both on the behalf of my guests and myself. So please let us know what you meant. Okay, so that sounds like on-time delivery and smart, efficient utilization of available resources are those team metrics, really. But also, I understand what you mentioned, Ben, about the bespoke approach, that no one size fits all for each and every different project. So right now, stepping down from the high horse of startups, tech foundership, raising money, just general personal questions. Decision-making framework. Any tips that you can share with other leaders how to improve decision-making? And there's no right or wrong answer. There's your answer, by which I mean the decision-making framework could be as simple as, is cake good? Well, yeah. Is it good for me? Yeah. Is it good for me in the amounts that I like to eat it? Not really. So that's a rule of thumb. What are your rules of thumb that don't concern cake, but much rather the leadership positions that you're in?
I have a few. The first one is if I have a big decision to make, I don't like to spend all my time on like big, hard decisions. I want to solve those eventually, right? But I don't want to make big, irreversible decisions. I want to break those down into smaller pieces and make progress on the smaller things and have a very iterative mindset towards these things. And then I have a framework that I like to use. I started to talk about this a little bit when it comes to making decisions. And it starts with, of course, not of course, but one of the things I think is really critical is writing that decision down so that you can reference it later. Writing it down and starting with, again, I said this before, what is the problem that we're trying to solve? What is the decision that we're trying to make? Can we make that really clear and crisp? Once we've got that, it's usually pretty straightforward to get a set of options or set of ideas that we might have for that decision. And then we take that set of options and pick one that we think is the best. And that I call a recommended option. So we've got lots of these documents floating around Dwolla that are decision documents where the teams have laid out exactly that thing. What's the problem we're trying to solve? What options do we have? And what's our recommendation? That then allows you to hopefully get to a decision. It's important to make decisions. And it also gives you a chance to evaluate that decision later, especially if you write it down. Without writing it down, you're making decisions all the time and not really able to evaluate, were you right or were you wrong about the decision? Would you change the decision you made later? But if you have it written down, you have a record of your thoughts, then that's something you can go back to and reference later. That's kind of the general framework that I try to apply. It seems very simple, but it's very, very effective in our org for making decisions.
And you, Ben?
I think Skyler hit it on a tool. I'm going to talk about an event. Given we're working asynchronously, we're working distributed, it's difficult sometimes to make a decision from just a document. Sometimes you need a ceremony. And so if I go back to work I've done in the past with Lean, there's a term, a Kaizon event, which is typically a longer event to solve a problem, but like you're bound to solve it, you're bound to a decision. So a small, almost like micro workshop, that's a decision-making like time, like we're going to make a decision here. We have to leave with that. I don't like to haul that out, the tool all the time, but sometimes that is a necessary tool to get buy-in, because decisions without buy-in really don't have a great success rate. So that's another event that I think is useful, especially since we're all working remotely in most cases, or collaborating maybe in different time zones or even different geographies.
We've had some success with those types of workshop events that Ben talked about. I'm reminded of a situation where we had a notion that there was a certain product we should go and build, or a certain enhancement we should make to our product to hit a certain vertical. And one of the ways that we tried to fail fast with that was running a workshop to try to build that idea from idea to prototype in a single week. And when we did that, that allowed us to either figure out in 1 week an idea that we probably could have spent quarters building. We tried to bucket it to 1 week. Should we do this or shouldn't we do this? And have an answer by the end of the week. When you time box stuff like that, you can get to answers and fail more quickly, or find that, yep, you're on the right path. In this particular case that I'm thinking of, we had this notion of a product we should build. We thought it might take us a couple quarters to do. We spent a week workshopping it in order to discover we were wrong about the idea. So we saved quarters of work by focusing the team on that one thing and time boxing it to what value, what prototype, what can we see in a single week.
Okay, and you mentioned, Ben, the Kaizen, right? It was the Toyota method of small steps.
Yeah, and I was talking really just about that event, and I made it my own. So I'm definitely using an interpretation of that, but
Okay.
an event specifically to solve a problem. In this case, make a decision. And for what it's worth, what Skyler mentioned, I had this book sitting here. This was the book that gave us the idea about running that 1 week sprint, if you will, to test that idea. The book's called Sprint, and it goes back to something I said earlier about education. You've got to continue to educate yourself, and reading that book and using that to fail fast was really important.
Solid. So we are 4 minutes and 4.5 minutes away, literally, from having to wrap up, at least according to the clock. So I'll be quick with my last question, and then Pedro, the NPS criticizer is back, so let's deal with him in a moment. I'm handing you a magic wand remotely, and you get to abracadabra your way into every 12-year-old being granted either access. We don't want to force any education on anybody, to a specific type of education. And you can teach them anything you want. You can teach them how to be kids and not teach them anything. You can teach them emotional intelligence, financial prudence, design thinking, coding. We've heard a plethora of answers, and there's no right or wrong answers. There's just your answer. So that's what I'm interested in. Ben, I see a smile, so I'm anticipating an answer.
Yeah. So, as the father of a 12-year-old, it's a very good question, right?
Easy.
So, I'm going to give you a two-part answer. The first one is just critical thinking. I want my daughter to think for herself, and I want her to think without a bias, and I want her to develop good judgment. So, not just doing something, but understanding why. It's really easily to move at a reckless pace and follow others. So, critical thinking is one, and that's a lifelong journey. But the other one, maybe more tactical, is fixing things, problem solving with a focus. So I think we are conditioned sometimes to be consumers, and I want us to think about being producers more. What I mean by that is just because something isn't working or broken doesn't mean we need to replace it. It can be fixed. It could be as simple as problem solving because wireless isn't broken, move the access point. It could be, hey, we're going to fix, I'll make it, and this actually just happened, fix the washing machine together. Because knowing how something works, knowing how to fix it makes us be not just a consumer, but a producer. That saves waste. And we can also, if we can fix something, then we can improve it. So those are the two, Philip, I go back to critical thinking and problem solving with an eye on fixing things.
Okay. I mean, you had it easy. You have a 12-year-old at the house. So, that was a little bit like cheating, essentially. So, Skyler, do you have a 12-year-old at the house that's going to make this answer easier, or are you?
I don't have a 12-year-old, but I can't lie. I do have an 8-year-old. So
Okay.
we're on the way, right? What I talked to him about is sort of the foundations from which you can learn. And if you have good comprehension and reading skills, you really can learn anything, right? Anything that's been written about, you can learn it. And so if I can wave that magical wand at very, very broad meta layer, I think it would be give everyone great learning and reading skills. From there, everything just sort of falls into place. If I went more tactical, go ahead.
No, I just wanted to add that it's not only about the value add, like the sort of upside, but the downside is also something that you protect against with education. Because anybody who comes from a place of education, very difficult to teach such a person hate, especially hate based on just diversity. So I completely agree that this is not only gearing you to be as successful as you can be, but also protecting you for falling into the pitfalls of, specific narratives or anything really that with education, you're just bulletproof.
Yeah, maybe. And we'll find out, right? I'm on the 8-year-old path working toward the 12-year-old path. You're right. Fingers crossed. The other one that came to mind for me was programming skills. If I could cast a magic spell, I think it's just a really valuable set of skills for folks to have. The ability to automate your way out of some of the more mundane tasks and more of the day-to-day. And maybe it's more like what Ben says, that concept of fixing things or that mindset of problem solving. But ultimately, if I could wave the magic wand and give everyone the opportunity to have programming skills and gain some of the benefits that you might have from having those skills, I think I'd love to do that.
And with literally 7 seconds left, Pedro, sorry, but your lengthy and contentful comments just won't cut it for what we have right now. But I'll just make sure that Pedro isn't a bad player because I can't display his comment here. He mentioned that NPS is typically given with a delay, and it's not real time. So especially what I mentioned about the quarterly approach, and even with your approach, even if it's during the time of sale, during the time of feedback collection, there is still something else. Pedro, I'll let you continue the conversation offline, and I'm sure that our guest speakers will be more than happy to riff with you. Who's right, who's wrong, or how can we be not right but efficient? So, gentlemen, thank you so much for today's talk. I really enjoyed it, judging by the amount of comments and interaction and your smiles. I'm gonna go out on a bet and say you did as well. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong. But otherwise, unless you have some ending remarks, anything you'd like to leave the audience with?
No, Philip, thank you so much for having us on the show today. And appreciate everyone who joined and was listening and following along with the comments. I've been reading along, and it's been great to see you all engaging with this stuff. So thank you so much for hearing Ben and I talk today, and for inviting us on the show.
Absolutely.
Likewise. Thank you, everybody.
Our pleasure. With that in mind, thank you everybody for watching, participating, and being here, not only for this hour, but for every past Tuesday over the year. And we hope to see you next Tuesday with yet another episode of Disruption Talks. So thank you for joining today, and see you next week.